Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast, hosted by Kristen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey y'all, welcome to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. I am so happy that you are listening today. Thank you so much for tuning in and checking this out, especially if you're new. I just want to say welcome. I hope you hang out and I hope you stick around. Be sure to listen to the end of every episode. That's where we have the kids only segment where kids just like you get to be on the podcast. Well, one thing I really love about making this podcast is getting to hear people's story. I get to meet some incredible people. I get to talk to some of my friends and hear their story. And I love learning about other people's background, where they live or where they came from, about their families, about the things they're passionate about. It really creates such an incredible story. And one of the things that I'm learning is how important it is to celebrate our own story and celebrate the story of other people. So that's why I'm really excited for us to talk today to my guest. Her name is Dr. Michelle Reyes. She is the Vice President of the AACC and Co-Executive Director of PAX. She's a scholar in residence at Hope Community Church and author of the book Becoming All Things: How Small Changes Lead to Lasting Connections Across Cultures. Dr. Reyes lives in Austin, Texas with her husband and her two amazing kids. I am so excited for you guys to hear this conversation with Dr. Michelle Reyes. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the Collide Kids podcast.
Hey, Kristen, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. I know everyone was saying 2021 is going to be better than 2020, and that didn't necessarily work out, but I'm really hoping 2022 is just a wonderful new breath of fresh air, so.
Yes, me too. I have my fingers crossed and my toes crossed for 2022. Yes. Come on, 2022. Well, this is so fun. Okay, I'm excited to talk to you and hear your story today. So would you just introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Michelle Reyes, and I am a second-generation Indian American, raised and grew up in the Midwest in Minnesota, but now living in Austin, Texas. But I still feel like a Midwest gal at heart, and even though in October in Texas it's still like 90 degrees, like I'm ready to break out my soups and my sweaters. So my husband and I were church planters in East Austin. We co-planted a minority-led, multicultural, multi-generational church called Hope Community Church. And so my husband Aaron serves as lead pastor. I serve as scholar in residence. And alongside vocational ministry, I serve as the vice president for the Asian American Christian Collaborative. And I'm also an author, a writer, a speaker. I had a book come out last year in April of 2021 called Becoming All Things: How Small Changes Lead to Lasting Connections Across Cultures. So excited to talk with you today, talk about kids and families and culture and ministry. So really excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, that's so cool. And I'm excited to talk to you as well. Now, I have to warn you that I always put my guests on the spot and I ask them to share a joke, because this is a podcast for kids. And this is the part they all like sit up and tune in to, is what kind of joke is she going to share with us today? So do you have a good joke you can share with us?
Oh, goodness. I don't know if it's a good joke. I don't know if I'm a funny person or not, but I'll say this.
Okay.
In 2006, my sister had double kidney failure. This part's not the joke, but my sister had double kidney failure. and I donated a kidney to her. And so she has one of
Wow.
my kidneys. I only have one kidney as opposed to two now. And I remember a few weeks after the surgery, a family friend, came over, brought their kids. And I think the son was about 4 or 5 years old. And I'm lying on the couch, and he said, "I have a joke for you." And I was like, "Okay, tell me a joke." And he's like, what did one kidney say to the other? And I was like, "I don't know." And he's like, "Nothing, because you only have one." I don't know why, but I thought that was the funniest joke at the time. I just remember crying, laughing at it. But so that's a very personal joke. I guess you
I
can't go out into
love
the
that.
world and share it, but that's my joke.
That's amazing. And isn't it always the worst? Like if you have surgery or something, you can't laugh. Like it hurts to laugh.
No.
And so you're like, you
Yes,
want to laugh, but you're like, yeah. So I'm sure that was good medicine for you during
yes,
that time.
it certainly was.
That's amazing. Well, okay, so let's talk about your story because you have a lot of interesting things about you. Now you're a doctor and a scholar in residence at your church. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, definitely. So I like to call it a checkered professional development journey. So for any kids out there worried about, making that best decision about their life that's going to set their whole course, it's okay. God will use you in different places at
Right.
different times. You could have different careers throughout your adulthood, and that can be a beautiful thing. But all that to say, I started out in Germanic studies. I have a PhD in 18th century German literature, and I began with my career in the academy teaching not only German language and literature, but specifically folklore, fantasy, mythology. I taught German, Italian, French folklore, feminist revisions of folklore. What drew me to this field of study simply is that these are the tales of the poorest people in the land. These are the tales of the folk, if you will.
Mhm.
And we all know them to some extent because of Disney, right? Tales like
Right.
Little Red Riding Hood and Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. But of course the originals are, I think, a lot more potent and powerful, and not romanticized, if you will. But what I was drawn to with folklore is that they are exploring real life issues for the poorest in the land, like hunger, starvation, death of children because of starvation, political oppression, evil kings, these sorts of things, high taxes, and just horrible things happening to them. And the question, of course, is when something happens to somebody that is poor and helpless, how do they get justice? Like, how do they survive and maybe even turn their life around or get back what was stolen from them? And one of the things that's really powerful about folklore is that when people have no money, no power, no resources at their ready, what they do have is their voice. And a lot of these peasants, men, women, children, they learn to share their story, to raise their voice and share their story with their community. And so often than not, it's either the entire community or neighbors or somebody that hears their plight and comes to their aid. And so there's this sort of idea of communal justice from elevating raising your voice and sharing your story. And while I don't teach folklore in the academy anymore, that's a concept, this idea of narrative justice, that I've taken with me now into vocational ministry. And so in my work as scholar in residence at our church, Hope Community Church, I'm very passionate about working in the community. We are in East Austin, which is low income, poor, disadvantaged Black and brown neighborhoods, and working with the immigrants in our midst, undocumented immigrants, working with those who have been falsely incarcerated, working with single immigrant moms with 8 kids who are just trying to figure out where their next meal is going to come from, and helping them elevate their voices, helping platform them and their stories so that our community can hear them, so that our mayor and governor can hear them. Our church, my husband and I, we get on phone calls with our senators, and we bring people from our community into these phone calls to say, hey, listen to these people's stories, care about what's happening to them, and maybe let's talk about policy change. So narrative justice and lifting up the tales and stories of the folk is still with me, but now within a very different context. And all that to say, the position of scholar in residence is just a really fancy way of saying that I write and speak on behalf of Hope Community Church, that my writing and speaking oftentimes case studies Hope, and then also serves as resources for our people.
That's amazing. And I love that, like what you said about how God takes, all the different parts of our life and he can put it together. And so your passion for stories and digging deep into some of these stories, that you're right. We've listened to the Disney version with all the songs and things like that we love, but there's so much to those stories that we might miss sometimes. How do you think that plays into how you read the Bible? Like when you read the Bible, how do you see the stories unpacked in that way?
Yeah, well, so I'll say this, Kristen, because I love folk tales, but part of our bedtime routine with my kids is we read a Bible story, and then usually we'll turn off the lights, lie down in bed, and then I'll tell them a folk tale. And what I like to
That's
do
cool.
is think through stories in the Bible that would pair well with themes from a folk tale, and vice versa. And something that I love about folklore, as opposed to, say, fantasy literature, which is all about like warriors and people with swords and the heroes and conquests, in folklore, this is not about the strongest or even the bravest people, but the women, the girls in folklore are incredibly smart and clever. And for tales about women, it's never about like beating up the bad guy. It's never about being Wonder Woman and fighting them all, but it's about being clever and knowing how to survive. Like winning or success in a folktale is about still being alive at the end of the story. And for the men, it's about being the compassionate hero. You might not know how to fight. You might not even be that strong or even that smart, but the heroes of folklore are kind. And there's often a point where they're like wandering through the woods on a quest and they get lost, and then they sit down and they cry because they don't know what they're gonna do. They're like, I'm hungry, I think I'm gonna die in this forest. But then some animal or some person comes along that boy helped earlier in the story and is like, hey, because you helped me, I'm gonna come help you, and we'll figure this quest out together. And so I just think about how clever women and compassionate men, how that elucidates so much of like the parables of Jesus, being cunning as serpents, but gentle as doves, as Jesus says, and even just biblical virtues of being wise and kind. And so it's fun. It's fun to kind of pair that up together. And I love now seeing I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I love seeing my son's imagination take off, and he's, coloring or drawing stories. And the other day he drew this big elaborate story. There's like a dragon, and there was this like knight. And I was like, tell me what's happening here. And he was like, well, there's this dragon and he's breathing fire and he's like, destroying the hillside. And then this knight comes along, and then, you're thinking like, and then the knight, beats the dragon and saves the day. And he said something like, and the knight, like, he looked at the situation and decided it was best just to leave the dragon alone and go home. And I was like, my job here is done.
How wise.
Like, you don't always have to fight the dragon in the world.
Right.
Sometimes the best thing to do is just go home. So
that's right. That's so smart.
That's fun.
You mentioned the parables of Jesus. That's one of my favorite things, because I love the fact that Jesus, like we keep reminding our kids, like, they didn't have TVs back then. So, they needed these like engaging stories. And Jesus was so good about telling stories to teach a lesson. He didn't just hammer them with like biblical theology and all these things that they should have known. He was trying to give them these stories. Mm-hmm. And I always wonder, like, what if the story he was telling was actually true? I always imagine like there's that one person in the crowd like, wait, that happened to me like that. I don't know. I just always wonder that like how good he was at connecting with people and how they probably related to the story so much more than we can see, because a
Yes.
lot of those stories were very culturally relevant. When he talked about shepherds or losing a coin or the prodigal son, like those stories were, we think like, oh, that was a nice story. But for the people, they really connected with those stories. It just shows how incredibly godly Jesus
Mhm.
was, that he was so wise and knew those things. Um, Tell us about, we talked a little bit about cultural identity. What does that mean? Like, what is that cultural identity, and how can we as families learn to celebrate that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, quite simply, cultural identity is simply the narratives born from our ethnic roots. So this connects actually with stories, because
Mhm.
we are people of stories, or we are storied people, if you will. And so the the journey of figuring out our cultural identity and developing our cultural identity is a journey of better understanding our story, our unique story, and all of its complexities, and not only just, where does our family come from around the world? What languages do we speak? What values and traditions do we have? What do we celebrate and how? And to know that all of that is our story, and is baked into how we understand ourselves as cultural beings. And so, I think it's really important for us to celebrate that, uh, especially because kids see color, even as
Mhm.
as early as ages 2 and 3. They're cognizant of their own skin color, of the skin color of other people's. That's why we have all these shows like Kids Say the Darndest Things, or or whatnot, because there's something about the innocence of children, that they identify differences, and most of the time don't mean anything mean by it, but they're like, why do they do that?
Mhm.
Or our family doesn't do that. What's going on over here with this kid, or that food, or whatnot. And so our kids are so cognizant at a young age of the differences between peoples, particularly between cultures. And so we have the unique opportunity as parents, um, to guide them in seeing the beauty of cultures, to be part of that early formation of breaking any sort of mentality that this is right versus wrong, and
Mhm.
instead seeing, I do it one way, or we do it one way, they do it another way. It's just different, and they're both good and beautiful. And so, a few things that we do. One is just in terms of helping our kids understand their own cultural identity, is talking regularly, sometimes even daily, about their skin color. We use Darina Williamson's book Colorful, which talks about like vanilla and caramel and chocolate colored skin, which really gives it an honoring and celebratory kind of description.
Mhm.
And when my son, for example, is talking about like a new friend that he's made at school, or at his American Ninja Warrior course, or things like that, and he talks about, hey, I made friends with this boy who has chocolate colored skin, and we talk about what he does, and what the other boys' interests are. And it's a wonderful way to continue to be cognizant of who we are, how we're different from others, but to like have celebratory language, and encouraging positive language around those differences. So that's my encouragement for parents, is not to try to like avoid the differences, or try
Mhm.
to be color blind and just be like, let's just all treat each other as the same. We're not the same. We can identify differences, but do it in a way that helps our kids delight in differences, and appreciate it, and see the beauty of God's creative design in all peoples.
Yes, I love that. And I think it's really easy to say, okay, just stop staring at them or don't point, or as parents, we're trying to like, because we don't know. And I think it's sometimes good for parents to go, I don't know why they do that. Let's find out, or let's go
Yes.
research it, or let's go talk to them. So opening that door for the kids listening, is it okay to ask questions about people that are different? Like how, because sometimes we feel that we get shut down, or kids might feel like they're not comfortable saying something. So is it okay to ask those questions?
Yeah, and absolutely. I think the more we ask questions, the more we learn, right? I definitely would encourage asking questions first with people you know, whether that's first your parents, or if it's maybe like a friend. I wouldn't encourage going up to somebody you don't know and saying, hey, why is your hair like that? Or why are you
Right.
wearing that, right? Because when you don't have a relationship, then your questions, even if they're well intentioned, can come across as hurtful
Mhm.
or confusing. Uh, so instead, go and talk to your mom or dad and say, hey, what is it that that person is wearing, or why is their hair like that, or what are they eating? Or if it's a friend, if it's your neighbor or somebody that you go to church with, or somebody that you see on a regular basis, make sure that the questions that you're asking are not that they don't have a negative tone, kind of like the what's wrong with you, or like,
Yeah.
why do you do that? But come with the posture of like, hey, I would like to learn more. Could you tell me more about, and maybe I think that's the better form of questions. Could you tell me more about your outfit? Could you tell me more about your food, as opposed to leading with why?
Mm.
And then lastly, before asking questions, always affirm first. Hey, that shirt's really cool. Could you tell me more about it? Hey, I love your hair. Could you tell me more about it? And I think if we can affirm first, our questions will be received better.
Yeah. There's always
Mm,
ways to kind of engage people. I love that, by starting with affirmation, because it's
yes.
it's interesting. Like you said, it's always good to learn more, and the more you learn, the more experiences you're going to have, versus staying closed off in your bubble. So that's
Yes.
great advice. Um, how can we continue to celebrate culture in our families? Like if we're not used to being around a culturally diverse community, or maybe we're in an area, or a neighborhood where there's not a lot of people that are different than us, what are some
Yeah.
ways that we can still celebrate culture, or connect with culture outside of where we live?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a family, some of the ways in which we can be intentional about our cultural identity development is um, leaning into or thinking through, how can we be proud of our culture? How can we celebrate our culture? And I think some simple but thoughtful ways to do that is, one, thinking through clothing, even for like major holidays, or Easter, Christmas, or whatnot. If you dress up, for example, if that's a big deal in your home to dress up, why not think through the clothing of your ethnic roots and wear something that's reflective of that? Um, think about the foods that are associated with your culture and your ethnic roots. How often do you eat those foods? For us, I'm Indian, my husband's Mexican. We have Indian food and Mexican food every week, at least one dish, one Indian dish, one Mexican dish, so that it's part of our fellowshipping together. On a daily basis, I'm very intentional with my kids about talking about how, hey, you're Indian and Mexican, and that's awesome. Or if our kids are like, why do you do that? It's because we're Indian. Why do we do that? It's because we're Mexican. That, like,
Yeah,
that kind of, and I mean that in a positive sense and not in a
sure.
negative sense. But and then also practices of gratitude. We take time once a day during a meal, to thank God for something about our culture, to thank God about the color of our skin, to thank God for the languages that we speak, to thank God for the delicious Indian food that we're eating, or something like that. And so for our kids, especially my son, my daughter's 3, but my son, who's far more cognizant now about culture, he's growing up proud of who he is. And I wish I had been proud of who I was at age
Mm.
6. My journey has a lot of shame and being bullied and being made fun of as a kid, because I was the lone Indian girl in my school, and that's a whole nother story. But I think my son is already standing on a stronger foundation, because he's just so proud of who he is. His name is Akash. He has an Indian name. He's got brown, caramel color skin like me, and he because he's proud of who he is, of how God has made him, if people say, for example, mispronounce his name, instead of just like shutting down and feeling embarrassed about it, he'll lovingly correct you. He'll be like, that's not how you say my name. I'm going to teach you how. And he doesn't mean anything malicious by that.
No,
It's
that's
just
good.
out of a love and joy for his name and who he is. And so I think, likewise, for any parent listening in, how can you instill that love and joy, that God-given pride in your family's cultural heritage, so that your children truly delight in who God has made them?
We'll be right back after this. You know, raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app. That's beautiful. I love that. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge that in other people as well.
Yes.
Talk for a minute about being bullied, because I know there's lots of people that have had that experience for a multitude of different reasons. What would you say was something you wish someone had done for you? Like, what, when you were a kid, what is something you wish another kid would have done for you during that time?
Yeah. Well, at the time, I thought I was the only one that went through these things, but I've learned now that there are these typical Asian experiences, particularly for first and second gen Asian Americans in this country, and that's bringing homemade food to school and being teased about it. I'm a kid that grew up in the 80s and 90s, and Indian food was not popular back then. Nobody knew what Indian food was, right? And so kids had all these names for the chicken curries and things that I was bringing to school, and so nobody wanted to sit with me. So when I think of middle school and high school, I think of just sitting alone at a cafeteria table by myself eating lunch. And I think about, kids making fun of the Indian clothes that I used to wear. And eventually I just got so tired of being made fun of, or them even making fun of my mom, that I didn't want to wear Indian clothes to school or to church anymore. And I so wish, and I think it would have been incredibly powerful if someone had just been a friend to me and an ally with me. I think about what would have happened if a non-Indian just said, you know what, I'm going to come and sit with Michelle at the lunch table, and I'm going to love her and her food, or I wonder if if kids had been making fun of me with the clothes I was wearing, and somebody stood up next to me and said, hey, that's not okay, like, her clothes are beautiful. And I think sometimes those few words of just standing up to a bully, and saying, that's not okay, that's hurtful, you shouldn't say that. Like, sometimes that's all we need to say. Like, you don't have to go into the full explanation or anything else.
Right.
But I think for fellow kids to know, use your voice and whatever privilege you have to stand up next to somebody who's being bullied and tell the bully that's not okay, and then invite that person to go somewhere. Like, hey, you want to go get a drink of water? Hey, you want to go sit at this table? Hey, can I show you something? And just sort of de-escalate that situation, separate the bully from the bullied, and just be a force for good. Sometimes just those little small actions and words will bring more healing than you even know.
Yeah. And I think we should always be looking for opportunities to make a stand or to stand up for someone else, because that's what Jesus would do, right?
Yes.
And so we're missing out on incredible relationships, incredible friendships, incredible food if we're not willing to stand with someone else. And sometimes I think we wait for the other person, like, we'll just wait for somebody else to do it. But if it's been in front of your eyes, then that's an opportunity God's presenting for you to stand up or to be a part of the help for that. So anybody listening right now that's seen something like that, I hope that you will take those opportunities to listen and to see what God wants you to do in that. And just like Michelle said, just take a stand or just say that's not okay. So I hope that we can stop some of those bullying situations and put that to rest. We're done with that. It's 2022. We need to get past that.
Amen.
Well, this has been so good, Michelle. I really appreciate you being on the show and sharing your story and all this good advice you have. Before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests to share a memory from when they were a kid. So do you have a memory you want to share with us today?
Yeah, for sure. So one of my favorite foods, or I should say one of my favorite breads within Indian food is called a puri. And it's this like fried deliciousness. And every year for my birthday and like Christmas, like that was what my mom always made for breakfast. But she also made puris if we ever had like it was a special dinner and guests were coming over. And I still remember there was some Indian families we knew that whenever they came over, my mom would make this ridiculous amount of puris to go with our dinner. And me and the other kids, we must have been like 7 or 8 years old. We had this contest to see like how many puris we could eat, you know, and I don't even know if like we ate like somewhere between like 10 and 15 puris each. And then we were all like just on the ground with stomach aches.
How big
but
are
I
they?
just,
How big
you know,
are they?
I mean, they're probably, I mean, they can be like as big as the size of your face or like the size of a fist. I'm sure my mom's was like somewhere in between that. But I look fondly on those memories of eating puris and puri eating contests as a kid.
That's awesome. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Especially for special occasions, you know, that always that special occasion food, whenever you smell something that smells like it takes you back to that moment, you know, so that's so good. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I knew this was going to be a fun conversation, Chris. I really just love your podcast and I'm grateful for our time together.
Wow, such a good conversation. And doesn't she have a great laugh? I just love that. I love what she was sharing with us today about folklore. I didn't realize it was the story of people trying to survive. So interesting. And I love when she was talking about celebrating the differences in other people, learning to appreciate and delight and see the beauty of God's design in all people. It's not about avoiding the differences or not noticing them, but to celebrate them in a way that honors them. And I always think it's good to learn more. I love what she was telling us about making sure that we ask questions and come with a posture of, I would like to learn more. Could you tell me more? Instead of just asking why or what's wrong with you. And always to affirm first. That means to say something kind first, because if we affirm before we ask our question will be received better. And I love when she was talking about celebrating our own family heritage often, making it a part of your family practice and practicing gratitude about your culture. So cool. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear this joke from my friend Leo.
Hi, I'm Leo. Why don't sharks eat clowns? Because they tasted funny.
I love that joke. Thank you, Leo. That was awesome. Well, if you would like to share a joke with me, or maybe you have a favorite quote or a favorite Bible verse that you've memorized, I would love for you to send that to me. You can find information about how to record that and send it to me through my social media. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod. You can also go check out my website, thecollidekidspodcast.com. If you'd like to support the podcast, here's a few ways you can do that. First of all, be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever app you're using for podcasts so that new episodes will automatically load each week, and leave a rating and a review. When you do that, it really does help shows like mine get a boost in the podcast app. So keep them coming so that more people can hear about it. You can also share the episode with friends and family and tell them why you and your family like to listen. Or you can go to my website and click the link that says Buy Me a Coffee. And anytime you think about it, I always appreciate your prayer support as well. I hope that you have had an amazing first week of 2022, and I hope that you learn to celebrate the story in yourself and in other people. In case no one has told you today, let me be the first to remind you that God loves you so very much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids podcast.